exclusive interview with Dr MUTISYA Emmanuel at the Imperial Hotel. We were discussing about TICAD 7 next year and opportunities to develop businesses between Japan and Africa. Good morning, Dr. Emmanuel MUTISYA.
Good morning.
Thank you very much for receiving Rendez-Vous on Asie magazine at the Imperial Hotel this morning, despite your busy schedule. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
For those who don't know you, you were educated in Kenya, Sweden and Japan.
That's right.
You studied mathematics and economic courses at Egerton University in Kenya. You're holding a Master of Science in Mathematics from Karlstad University in Sweden, Master of Art in Public Administration from International Christian University in Japan, and a PhD in Sustainability Science from the University of Tokyo. Am I correct?
That's correct.
Oh, that's a very impressive career. Are you currently based in Kenya or Japan?
Well, I don't know where I'm based at the moment.
Yes.
I have an office in Japan. I mean, I've been working for the United Nations University for the last several years.
Yes.
But I also have an office at the African Development Bank in Cote d'Ivoire in Ivory Coast.
Yes.
We have an office in Nairobi.
Yes.
And we have another office in Pretoria, South Africa. So I move around mainly in Africa because most of projects and initiatives are in Africa.
All right, yeah, you're quite well implemented in several countries in Africa. And but you have actually completed a part of your studies and career in Tokyo.
Right.
How does it make you feel to come back to the city from time to time?
Well, you know, Japan is a very special country for me. It is a country that I call my second home because I've spent a third of my life in Japan, and mainly in Tokyo, as a student and also as a professional. So when I come back to Japan or to Tokyo, I feel like just coming back home. And when I land, of course, I go around eating Japanese food and visiting my friends in Japan and interesting sites in the country.
That's what you enjoy the most when you are back in Japan?
Especially the food part of it. I mean, Japan has very tasty and healthy food. So, of course, I enjoy also moving from izakaya to Yoshinoya and some of these interesting eateries, especially in Tokyo. But, of course, meeting friends and contact persons that I have around, and also my students at the University of Tokyo.
You're representing one of the major actors of cultural and economic exchange between Japan and Africa. You are active in several areas such as education and sustainable environment. What is your personal take on TICAD 6, who actually occurred for the first time in 2016 in Africa, in Kenya, your own country?
I would say that TICAD, the process is a very important process for enhancing partnerships between Japan and Africa. But I would also say that holding TICAD 6 in Nairobi was a unique and exciting experience, not just for Japan, but also for the African countries. One, to show Japan and other advanced economies that Africa can do it. I would say that TICAD 6 was the largest TICAD summit ever held by Japan because several thousands of people converged in Nairobi, both from Africa, from Japan, and from elsewhere, to discuss ways of doing business, ways of partnering with the Japanese private sector, and of course, the Japanese government. So yes, I would say that the feeling is good, that the initiatives that we run on education and environment are part or are within the TICAD process. And most of our partners in these programs and projects are Japanese entities and institutions.
According to you, Mr. MUTISYA, what would be the best strategy to adopt for Africa to grab opportunities offered by TICAD concept? How to run this project?
For the last 6 summits, Japan has always pledged a certain amount of money to promote this partnership between Japan and Africa. Now, the African governments, African citizens, have the responsibility of actively working with the Japanese government and Japanese private sector to attract this money to our economies in the various countries in the continent. So I would say that, like for instance, Japan in TICAD 6 pledged 30 billion US dollars. Now, we are almost coming to TICAD 7. How much of that 30 billion dollars has gone to Africa? Now, this is the responsibility of the governments and the private sector from Africa to engage with the Japanese government and Japanese private sector to make sure that this money goes to Africa. It is also the responsibility of the government offices, like the embassies in Japan, as well as the diaspora, the Africans in Japan, work with the Japanese government, the Japanese private sector, to bring these opportunities, resources to Africa to improve the lives of African people in our countries.
TICAD rather refers to business and money than African culture. However, Africa possesses many talented people, musicians, painters, who are actually not often invited or associated with a TICAD concept. How can those people take advantage of TICAD's project?
Well, I would say that the organization of TICAD process should be now done in a different way.
Yes.
The first, second, third TICAD was about projects with the Japanese government to Africa. TICAD 4, TICAD 5, TICAD 6 brought the aspect of investment by the private sector. Now, we are missing several components of this knowledge exchange. And of course, one of it is the musicians, the media, and other groups of people who are very talented and who could add a lot of value to the TICAD process. In TICAD 7, I would propose that the organizers invite these different talents so that we can showcase the different ways that we can partner up with Japanese entities outside the investment sort of portfolio only, by bringing groups, the artists, the musicians from Japan and also from Africa to come and see or exchange various or different ways of bringing these various cultures to our respective countries, both in Africa but also in Japan.
Do you think that Africa is well represented in Japan?
I would say yes, and I would also say no. Yes, because we have several embassies and consulates, consular offices of African governments in Japan. We have also a number of African diaspora who are working and living in Japan. Some of them are students, but most of them are professionals doing very exciting things. Now, because of the quality of the African diaspora, and of course the quality of the embassies and consular offices that are in Japan, we have a significant number of representation of Africa in Japan. And this group can very much bring the opportunities that we see in Japan to Africa. But then on the other side, we realize that when you compare the size of the African diaspora in Japan to that of the US or UK, the number is very small, given the size of the economy and the size of opportunities that we have in this country. Number two, the embassies and the consular offices here in Japan of African governments are quite small, and the number of staff are too small to tap into the massive opportunities that are presented by the Japanese private sector and of course the Japanese government. So I would say that of course we will continue, or we need to continue, attracting more Africans to Japan so that we can bring as many opportunities to Africa. But also I'll urge the African governments, the various countries, to expand their embassies, their consular offices, by bringing more of our government officials from various sectors to come and look into the various opportunities and bring these opportunities to our countries in Africa.
A good government and security measures are two essential elements to invest in general. How Kenya, your country, can meet those criteria?
Well, I would say that one, the Japanese private sector has increased their presence in Kenya. Many of them have gone to Kenya, especially after TICAD 6, to establish their branches or their offices or their factories in the country. But I would also say that the number of Japanese companies operating in Kenya is very small. Why? Of course, because of three reasons. One of them is security. The other one is the difficulty of doing business in the country because of corruption, and also the processes of getting permits to do business out there. But also, from the Japanese perspective, the distance. They say that Japan-Africa, Japan-Kenya is, a long distance. Now, the Kenyan government is working very hard today to make doing business in Kenya easier, faster, and more friendly. And this is something that I must commend the country. The country is also, the government is also fighting corruption to make sure that when you come in as an investor from Japan, you're not taken round by government officials who would be looking for bribes, who would be looking for corruption money so that they can allow you to do business in the country. And number three, the government is working very hard to provide a secure environment by making sure that security in the country is maintained. And I would say that for the last 2 years, since 2016, we've seen very strong improvement of security situation in the country. And these are commitments that the Kenyan government is making, not only for Japan, but for all other international investors. But also me, as a Kenyan. The government is working hard to make sure that as a Kenyan and other Kenyans, we can do business in the country securely, safely, and of course, without corruption. Because these are some of the basic tenets or basic requirements to investing or to doing successful investments in any country.
Which message can you address to African students actually who received a scholarship from Japanese government and at the end decide to finish their studies or go to other continents such as North America or Europe and do not come back to Africa? What can you say to those students?
Well, 10 years ago, I came to Japan as a student. And I did my master's, I did my PhD.
Yes.
Of course, my plan was to go back to Kenya immediately. But after my PhD, I got a job in Japan. And I've stayed working with the Japanese institutions for the last 5 years or so. I would say that 20 years ago, the world or Africa was talking about brain drain. The best brains from Africa being taken up by the leading economies in the world. You see doctors, engineers leaving Africa to go and work in the UK, in the US, in Japan, and other advanced economies. But 20 years later, today, we are not talking about brain drain. We are talking about brain circulation. Because of technology, the world has become a small village that you can work for Africa from Tokyo. I work for Nairobi from outside Kenya. So what we should push for is to ensure that Africans outside Africa continue to support Africa or to work for Africa by sharing their experiences or by linking Africa as the bridge of investors from outside Africa. But also, I would say that some of us should go home. So out of the many students who get out of the country, of our countries in Africa, a few of them should go back. The rest should be out there in the world, trying to trap the best or to attract the best opportunities out there. And we as Africans should build a community of practice or a community of experts or professionals that is going to work together wherever you are to promote Africa's sustainable development. And that doesn't mean that you have to go to Africa, as I said. You can be anywhere in the world, but just like I am, you can continue working for your own country from outside your country.
Billions of investments are announced at summits between Africa and China, Africa and France, Africa and America, and TICAD. But we are still waiting for results in terms of job creation, and young people are actually becoming impatient. What do you think about that?
I'm happy that you're raising that question. I am with the African Development Bank, and we are talking about three things. One is human capital development and skills. Number two is empowering the youth to come up with innovations that will lead to business. And number three is creation of jobs for the youth especially. Why? Because we have 4 100 million youth in Africa. In a few years, 20 years, we're going to have around 800 million. Now, today, more than 60% of the African youth is unemployed. If you have young people in our countries in Africa who are not employed, then that is a massive problem that if it is not solved, Africa is going to go back to serious wars and conflicts. Because, if you let youth roam around in our countries without doing anything substantial, and these youth would like to live well, they would like to start their families, yet there are no opportunities to get incomes, there are no jobs, there are no industries, then we are going to have a problem. But the African Development Bank and several other organizations in the continent, plus the governments of African countries, are working hard to create opportunities for the youth.
Still, we have so many young African people who actually fled by millions to Europe,
yes,
through the Mediterranean Sea, and at the risk of their own life. Do you have any message you want to address to them?
You see, the world, the advanced world, has created an image that Africa is a continent with no opportunities.
Yes.
And of course, African governments have made it so difficult for African youth to get into productive activities and attract or earn income. Now, because you do not have money to live a better life, and then you have that image that the solution to your money problems can only be found in Europe, then you risk your life from Libya, from Morocco, from Algeria, and cross over through the Mediterranean Sea to France, to Spain, to Italy, and then you never make it out there. Now, the problem is that most of us in Africa do not know that these countries in Europe are facing the same problems. There are many more opportunities for especially migrants who do not have any professional background. What do I say? What would I say to this one? I would say that the governments of our countries in Africa should create conducive environment for our youth to remain in Africa. And this can only be done if we build more industries that are going to provide more jobs. But we need also to tell the youth that we should not wait for the government to solve our problems. Our education system should train us to create job opportunities, not to go out there and look for jobs. Our young people should have strong will to innovate, how to develop innovations. That will lead to business development. That will lead to enterprise growth. That will lead to jobs. If we can create that environment, then I will tell you for sure that no one would want to leave any country in Africa, even to come to a country like Japan, because everything will be out there in Africa. And I'm very confident that as Africa, we are going to get that level. So I'm not worried at all. But I also want to add one thing that, you've said that China goes to Africa,
yes,
Korea goes to Africa, India goes to Africa, with all these summits, and says that we are here because of Africa. No, I want to correct that. These countries are not there because they want to assist Africa. We've seen it for the last 40, 50 years. French government, the British government, the German government. We are all colonizers of some of these countries.
yes.
But for 50 years, we have not gotten any substantial development from these partners. Why? Because these countries are looking for their own growth of their own economies. They are coming to Africa to look for resources from our economies and go develop their economies out there. Because Africa is a continent full of resources. Now, our governments should stand strong and make sure that we do not allow this exploitation to take place. If China, Korea, Japan wants to come to Africa, let them set their industries in Africa and give opportunities to our people in Africa. It has to be either a win-win situation, not a win-loss situation that we are seeing from the kind of partnerships that these summits are bringing.
Do you think TICAD next year will allow those implementation to be done?
I would say that Japan is a bit unique.
Yes.
Because when you see the way Japan's support to African countries is sort of implemented, you realize that Japan does not bring workers from Tokyo or from Osaka or from any of the regions to Africa to go and build roads,
Yes.
or to go and clean or do some hawking business.
Why that?
They go out there and build capacities by training experts who are going to work with the Japanese in Japanese projects in Africa. Now that is what other countries are missing, because we want to see engineers coming to build roads but working with the Africans by first training them so that we can have genuine exchange of skills and knowledge, transfer of technologies. Because if that one doesn't happen, then we'll continue seeing a lot of exploitation from these superpowers, into Africa, and then we continue living, a poor continent. And this narrative can be changed, one, by the government, and two, by the Africans, because we are not lesser human beings. We have the capacity. You are here. You're from Congo.
Yes.
And you are well educated. You compete with the Japanese in Japan. So what makes them, other countries, look at Africa and say that, Africa is not qualified, or they are not intelligent? This is our problem that we have created, to show that we do not have that strong capacity and, of course, motivation to work for our economies in Africa.
So your voice at TICAD will be to actually persuade more Japanese companies to train engineers locally in Africa?
Yes, I would say in TICAD 7, the narrative must change.
Yes.
That we want to see more of the pledge that Japan is going to pledge out there, go to Africa, but with Japanese companies working with Africans in Africa, by first, of course, training them and letting them work with those projects, so that when Japan leaves, Africa can continue developing their countries by building these projects by themselves.
Yes.
And that is possible. And I would say, as I said, that in my project at the African Development Bank, which are funded by the Japanese government, it's very more about transfer of knowledge, transfer of skills in different sectors, including engineers, energy, technology, to Africa. Because Japanese focus on quality infrastructure and, of course, quality skills transfer is something that, as Africans, we can strongly gain from. And you've been here, so you have seen this quality.
Yes.
If you can bring this quality home, then to Africa, development be one of the best cases in the world.
So with all those ambitions and interesting project, where do you see yourself within 5 or 10 years?
I like that question. I like that question. That's a question that you asked when you're looking for a job.
Exactly.
Where do you see yourself? You see, my dream is very specific.
Yes.
I work for Africa, wherever I am. In the next 5-10 years, I would like to see quality infrastructure in any or in every country in Africa. Quality infrastructure in all the sectors. It can be quality skills development, quality energy infrastructure, quality roads, because that is what we need if we want to improve the quality of life of Africans in Africa. Now, I want to be part of the leadership system that is going to ensure that this quality infrastructural development is going to be achieved. And for that to happen, of course, we want to work with other economies. So I would want to stand in between, for example, Japan and Africa, to make sure that I tap the best because of my experiences of being outside Kenya and Africa for many years. And of course, I wouldn't mind if I was the president of Kenya. I would be happy to to bring back my leadership skills to the country and tap the best opportunities from the leaders that I have engaged or interacted with across the planet.
I'd like to thank you also very much for answering all our questions, and wish you also good luck for TICAD next year.
Thank you very much.